What would you do if the place you poured your heart into called home was threatened by those who claimed to protect it? In the rolling hills of Montana, where the sky stretched wide and the air carried the scent of pine and freedom, Elias Hawthorne had built his life. His ranch, a sprawling 200 acres of hard-earned earth, was more than a homite, was a legacy. His grandfather had tamed this land, his father had nurtured it, and Elias had sworn to honor it. The old barn, weathered but proud, stood as a testament to decades of sweat and love. But the Karen Hills Homeowners Association, self-appointed guardians of the community's standards, had other plans. They wanted Elias gone, and they'd stop at nothing to make it happen. Elias wasn't your typical rancher. At 42, he was lean and weathered, with eyes that held both kindness and a glint of defiance. He'd spent years in the city as a lawyer before returning to the ranch, trading suits for jeans and courtrooms for open fields. The HOA, a clique of affluent newcomers who'd built their McMansions on the outskirts of his land, saw him as an obstacle. His ranch, with its rustic charm and free-roaming cattle, didn't fit their vision of a manicured, suburban utopia. They called his lifestyle unkempt, his barn an eyesore, and his existence a threat to their property values. It started with letters polite at first, then venomous. Comply with community standards, they demanded, citing vague bylaws about aesthetics and land use. Elias ignored them. He wasn't part of their HOA. His ranch predated their gated enclave by a century. But the Karens, led by Meredith Voss, a real estate mogul with a smile as sharp as a blade, didn't care about history. Meredith, with her perfectly coiffed hair and an army of lawyers, had a knack for getting her way. She'd already strong-armed 2 smaller landowners into selling out. Elias was her next target. "Why don't you just sell?" she'd asked at a town hall meeting, her voice dripping with condescension. "You could retire comfortably. This rustic lifestyle doesn't suit the future of Karen Hills." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others avoiding Elias's gaze. He stood, his boots scuffing the polished floor, and said, "Meredith, this land's been my family's since before your great-grandparents were born. I'm not going anywhere." The room fell silent, but her eyes promised war. The HOA escalated. They filed complaints with the county, claiming Elias's cattle were a public nuisance. They sent inspectors to nitpick his fences, his water rights, even the height of his grass. Then came the eviction notice. It was absurd. Elias owned his land outright. No mortgage, no liens, but Meredith had found a loophole. A sliver of his property, a narrow strip along the road, had been rezoned years ago as part of the HOA's jurisdiction. They claimed he was encroaching on their land and demanded he vacate. Elias's blood boiled. He'd fought for this ranch through drought, debt, and heartbreak. His wife, Clara, had loved this land before cancer took her 5 years ago. Every sunrise over the hills reminded him of her laugh. He wasn't just defending Dearth, was defending her memory. But the HOA didn't care about sentiment. They wanted control, and they thought they'd won. That's when Elias met Riley. Riley Parker was an unlikely ally. A wiry, tattooed mechanic with a quick grin and a rap sheet for petty theft. She'd moved to Karen Hills to escape her past. She rented a small garage on Elias's land, fixing cars for locals and keeping to herself. The HOA despised her almost as much as they despised Elias. Her oil-stained coveralls and loud music were an affront to their pristine ideals. But Riley had a knack for digging up dirt, and one night, over a bottle of whiskey in Elias's kitchen, she dropped a bombshell. "I hacked into Meredith's email," Riley said, her eyes gleaming. "She's been bribing county officials to push you out. There's a developer waiting to turn your ranch into a golf course. She gets a cut if you sell." Elias leaned back, his mind racing. "You're sure?" Riley slid a USB drive across the table. "Proof. Emails, bank transfers, the works." This was the twist Elias hadn't seen coming. Riley wasn't just a tenant, she was a wild card. A rogue with a heart of gold and a vendetta against the HOA. She'd been watching Meredith's moves, piecing together her scheme. The HOA wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a front for greed. Meredith had orchestrated the rezoning years ago, banking on Elias's eventual surrender. But Elias didn't surrender. He fought smarter. Using his legal background, he pored over the HOA's bylaws and found their Achilles heel. The strip of land they claimed was his access road, which they used to shuttle their SUVs to their estates. It was technically his property, leased to the HOA for a nominal fee decades ago. If they wanted to play dirty, he'd rewrite the rules. He doubled the rent on the access road. Overnight, the HOA's budget took a hit. Meredith raged, calling an emergency meeting to rally her followers. "This is extortion," she screamed, slamming her fist on a mahogany table. But Elias wasn't done. He parked every vehicle he owned, his truck, Riley's beat-up sedan, even an old tractor across the HOA's designated parking spaces along the road. Legally, he was within his rights. The HOA's gated community was landlocked without his road, and now they couldn't even park. The Karens were livid. They retaliated with lawsuits, but Elias was ready. Armed with Riley's evidence, he countersued, exposing Meredith's bribery scheme to the county. The local paper ran the story, and suddenly, the HOA's pristine image crumbled. Neighbors who'd once shunned Elias started whispering about Meredith's corruption. The tide was turning, but victory came at a cost. One night, as Elias sat on his porch, watching the stars, a fire broke out in the barn. The flames roared, devouring the old wood like a beast unleashed. By the time the fire department arrived, the barn was gone along with Clara's old journals, stored in a trunk inside. Elias stood in the ashes, his heart breaking all over again. The fire was ruled arson, but no evidence pointed directly to Meredith. She sent a condolence card, her handwriting smug. "Such a shame about your barn. Perhaps it's time to move on." Riley urged Elias to keep fighting. "We've got her on the ropes," she said, her voice fierce. But Elias was tired. The ranch felt hollow without the barn, without Clara's presence in its walls. He looked at Riley, her eyes burning with the same defiance he'd once had, and made a choice. He sold the ranch, not to Meredith's developer, but to a conservation trust that promised to keep the land untouched. The HOA got their road back, but at a price that they'd never build their golf course. Elias used the money to start a foundation in Clara's name, funding legal aid for small landowners facing predatory HOAs. Riley joined him, her hacking skills now used to expose corruption nationwide. Meredith won her battle, but not her war. Her reputation was in tatters, her dreams of a golf course empire dead. Elias walked away, his heart heavy but his conscience clear. He'd lost his home, but he'd kept his soul. The land would endure even if he couldn't. As he drove away from Karen Hills for the last time, Riley in the passenger seat, Elias glanced at the hills where Clara's laughter still echoed in his memory. He'd fought for her, for their legacy, and though the cost was brutal, he'd made sure the Karens paid a price too. ND.